All right, we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about the book Fire on the Horizon, which tells the story of the Deepwater Horizon oil rig disaster.
Yeah, this book was really intense. It explains what happened at a Deepwater Horizon oil rig in 2010, how one of the worst oil spills happened in history. The book was written by Tom Shorter and John Carand.
One thing I liked about the book was how detailed it was. It doesn't just talk about the explosion, it explains the workers' lives, like the captain of the rig, Kurt Kutchin, who had just left his family a few weeks ago. The book talks about how the dangers of offshore drilling and the mistakes that led to the disaster.
Yeah, the book talks a lot about how there was a lot of warning signs ignored. Worker noticed problems with the pressure test and safety system, but the oil rig was behind schedule a year or more, so the company wanted to save as much time and as much money as they could that needed up costing lives.
Okay. Yeah, the Deepwater Horizon was a huge oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. On April 20th, 2010, the rig exploded after gas shot up through the drilling pipes and ignited. 11 workers died, and millions of gallons of oil were spilled into the ocean.
Yeah, the book does a really good job about showing how chaotic everything became after the explosion. Workers were trapped in the fire, spreading everywhere, and the people were trying to survive while alarms were going off all around them.
I also thought it was interesting how the authors explained the technology behind drilling. Sometimes it got a little complicated, but it helped me understand how dangerous the job really was.
Yeah, offshore drilling sounds terrifying. After reading this book, workers spend weeks away from their families working around heavy machinery and extremely high pressure systems. One small mistake can become a disaster.
Another big part of the book was corporate responsibility. The authors think that disaster safely could have been prevented if safety rules had been followed better.
That was probably the biggest message I got from the book, too. Cutting corners to save money can lead to terrible consequences. Not only did workers lose their lives, but the environment was damaged for years after the spill.
One thing we should also talk about is the difference between the book and the movie Deepwater Horizon. The
Yep.
movie is called The Deepwater Horizon. The book is called Fire on the Horizon. So there's a bit of a difference in title.
Yeah, the movie focuses a lot more on action and suspense. It spends most of the time showing the explosion and how people are trying to survive. This movie is faster paced and more dramatic than the movie. Doesn't talk about why the rig actually exploded.
On the other hand, the book goes way into more detail about the causes of the disaster. It explains the science behind drilling and the tanks that hold the oil, more about the decisions made by the large company, which was BP, before the explosion happened.
Another difference between the movie mainly follows Mike Williams. The book talks about many different workers and what they experience. The book feels more informative, while the movie is more focused on disaster.
The environmental damage was huge. Oil spread across the Gulf of Mexico, hurting wildlife, fishing businesses, and beaches. The cleanup took many, many years, and there's still remnants of this explosion today.
And something that made the book more emotional was hearing about the families of the workers. The book talked about the people on the rig, their lives outside the rig, so they felt real instead of just names in the news story.
I think that's why the book stands out more so than the movie. It mixes facts with stories from the real people on the rig, which keeps the book interesting.
If I had to rate the book, I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10. It was detailed and dramatic, but still easy enough to follow most of the time.
I'd give it around the same, maybe an 8.5 or a 9. It really is a good book if you like true history stories or learning about real disasters. All right, I think that wraps up today's podcast about Fire on the Horizon. Thank you for listening, and thank you to Bales for doing this with me.
Yep, see you guys later.